sounds like grade school with those chairs scraping, doesn't it? Doesn't it, Tony? Welcome to the February 21st meeting of the Rotary Club of Louisville. I'm Barry Barker, president of our club, and to lead us in our invocation is Thomas Jones, senior banker at J.P. Morgan Chase Bank. Oh, that's right, we're missing a candidate.
Well, it's my pleasure to introduce our three new members. John Duffy. John is the president of RJE Business Interiors, a commercial furniture business with showrooms in Louisville and Lexington. John is a Wildcat, but he's a graduate of Villanova University. He's been married to wife Nancy for 32 years. They have 5 children, 5 grandchildren. John is also a certified licensed captain for small private yacht cruisers, certified by the U.S. Coast Guard. His sponsors, thank you, go to Maggie Schellenberger and Craig Sherman. John Duffy. Our next new member is Tahisha Rollins. She is an associate state director with AARP Kentucky, where she is responsible for member involvement in state and national affairs, particularly in Medicare and healthcare reform. She serves on the board of directors for the Kentucky Association for Gerontology and was appointed to the Institute for Aging by then Governor Beshear. Tahisha has a bachelor's degree in biology, a master's degree in public administration, both earned from Kentucky State University. And an interesting fact about Tahisha that links her with our announcer, she has walked in great strides, a fundraiser for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. And for the last decade, she's raised over $25,000 for the foundation. Tahisha is married to Dr. Troy Rollins and has 2 children, TJ and Talia. Her sponsors, thank you, Larry Sloan and Greg Braun. Tahisha Rollins. And our third new member is Doug Scott. Doug is the Vice President of Mission Advancement at the Healing Place, working daily to promote and support the mission of helping men and women struggling with addiction through philanthropic and business revenue. Doug graduated from Fishburne Military School in Waynesboro, Virginia, where he gained his leadership skills. He's a professional in business development with distinctive success in leveraging strategic partnerships to generate revenue and to exceed goals. When not fighting for the men and women of the Healing Place, Doug can be found trying his best to be a good husband, a father to his 20-year-old daughter, or watching NCAA sports, not necessarily in that order. His sponsors, thank you, Jay Davidson and Mary Ann Butler. Welcome to the Rotary Club, Doug, Tahisha, and John.
Speakers Committee, an excellent chair of our Speakers Committee. Ken.
Thank you, Barry. I have to say there's a lot of pressure because not only do I have my dad here, I got my attorney brother, we got Rabbi Diamond in the back, Rabbi Rapport. I'm not a professional speaker, but I'm going to do the best I can to make this quick and short and give Rabbi Rapport the introduction he deserves. I'm going to skip some of the formalities of his credentials. You probably read them in Sparks, but Rabbi Rapport, for over 30 years, has served as a rabbi at the temple, which is Kentucky's largest and oldest Jewish congregation. Today's presentation, Building Bridges in a Time of Division and Hate, is quite timely, as we have seen the proliferation of hate groups in recent years. While it's in the news, there's a lot more to the story, which Rabbi Rapport will enlighten us on today. But also I want to share a quick story about Rabbi Rapport, which tells you something about his persistence. And when the rabbi was in high school in Marquette, Michigan, his passions were not only academics, but also football and wrestling. So Joe, he was a very competitive athlete, a championship wrestler. So as a senior, he won the state of Michigan wrestling high school championship at 167 pounds. And listen to this, he had a broken ankle in the championship match. So how's he do that? As I say, Rabbi Rapport, very resourceful. In the championship, legend has it, Joe taped the wrong ankle, confusing his opponent who relentlessly worked on the wrong leg. This is a bright, clever guy. I love it. I don't know if it was fair to all concerned, but he got the job done. Wonderful. As a member of his congregation, I've witnessed Rabbi Rapport his genius over the years. Rabbi Rapport is a great teacher. He's a learned scholar. He's incredibly smart, caring, passionate, and a very gifted speaker. Please give a warm Rotary welcome to Rabbi Joe Rapport.
Needless to say, the most unique introduction I have had in many, many years. When I applied to seminary, they wanted to know about this wrestling thing. And the wrestling rabbi did not really strike them as the best moniker for them. We wrestle with other things today. The topic was decided, and the invitation, which I greatly appreciate, to speak to you this afternoon, several months ago. And Kenny's persistence in finding a way that my schedule and yours would actually come together deserves thanks at this opening. But we didn't really understand how timely this topic would be as the news has continued to mount more and more concerns over rising anti-Semitism in America and around the world. I particularly want to thank you all for showing up for this conversation because I have to say from a marketing perspective, let's talk about like hate and division and all these challenging things in our community. Couldn't have been the most entertaining thing you had on your options for today. So I want to appreciate Rotary for inviting me, for you all for coming, for several faces of people I've known for many, many years in the community, for coming out to support me. Let me specifically, I don't know where Mohammed Babar is sitting right there. Babar has been a shining light in our community for compassion and concern. Whenever there is a challenge, we can always count on the leadership of members of Rotary and specifically of Babar to be able to help us kind of find a road towards what Louisville really stands for, which I think is the point of this conversation for today. I want to start because my background actually is in history. Is it on? It's on. And I'm pushing the go button. Oh, there we go. Okay. Or maybe you're cheating and helping. Okay. She didn't help at all. Okay. Thank you. I don't know how many of you know this little piece of history, but I think that understanding the world we live in and the world that we can create together can very often be built out of the moments in history that have been really turning points for ourselves and our community. By show of hands, how many of you have ever heard of Bloody Monday in Louisville? Okay, I have an educated group. We don't talk about Bloody Monday very often. You may have had the opportunity to pass by the markers, the historical markers on the road. But there's lessons in that moment for us for today. For those of you who might not know the story, going back, it's August 6, 1855. Louisville is a booming community, one of the fastest growing cities in America. Immigrants are coming here from Germany, from Ireland, and Italy, as we begin to see this great wave of immigration that's coming to America's shores. It's going to build this nation into the country we are today. The political establishment of America is, foundering. The great Whig Party led by Kentucky's great Senator Henry Clay, with the departure of Clay and that generation, has fractured into two parts. We now have a Democratic Party and a nascent Republican Party, which has adopted the cause of abolition of slavery, and what's left of the Whig Party, which originally went by the name the American Party, but later became known as the Know-Nothings. The Know-Nothings were an anti-immigrant, anti-lots of things, anti-abolition of slavery for sure, group. And on August 6th, which was election day back then, they hatched a plan to basically barricade the election polling stations around the city in the immigrant neighborhoods, targeting particularly the new German immigrants who would be the lifeblood and would build the city for generations after that. The mayor of the city was a know-nothing who'd recently been elected and assured them that there would be no police guarding any of the polling stations in these areas. They got a very large number of very large people to see to it that no one who didn't know a particular hand sign showing that they were know-nothing was going to be able to vote that day. Riots broke out. Neighborhoods just down the street from here on West Market were burned, Queens Row. There were officially some 20-some fatalities as immigrants in their neighborhoods fought back to defend themselves. The vast majority of the fatalities were among the German community, the immigrant community. The Cathedral of Assumption was literally threatened with being burned to the ground. Only actually know-nothing leaders who stepped forward to quell the violence kept that from happening. In the aftermath of that, the Catholic Church's listing of fatalities runs up to over 100. It was a real low ebb mark for Louisville historically. And in the immediate aftermath, and here are the two lessons that we learned from this. Tens of thousands of people left Louisville because this wasn't a city that they wanted to live in. And immigrants stopped coming to Louisville for a generation. And what was the fastest growing city in America soon fell behind Chicago, which at the time was a backwater place, San Francisco growing on the gold rush, and Louisville basically became stagnant for a full generation before it began to reassert what the community stood for. Second lesson we learned from this is that politics makes for prejudice. People make for peace. Louisville has become, from about the 1880s, 1890s forward, this shining light, interfaith cooperation, and a community which we now call ourselves a community, a compassionate community, but has been sort of a hallmark of who we are and what we stand for. In turbulent times, we've worked together through the civil rights movement, through challenges that we've faced in wars and depressions, to be able to build a community that cares for everybody who's here. And we celebrate that today. And the ability to be able to learn from one's history and to recognize these moments in time that call to us to stand up for what we believe and who we are as a community, that's what makes us really one. And that's what really provides the opportunity for a future for us, for our families, and for the future of our community. The challenge we come to talk about today is not all that different. There were Jews in Louisville at that time. They were German Jews, and they were caught up in the violence as well, even though it was largely focused on Catholic who would come from Germany. But over the course of that period, the German Jews stayed here. And the founding of our congregation, which was in 1843, the founding members of that congregation stayed here and built a Jewish community that's become part and parcel of Louisville for many generations. We have members of our congregation this year celebrating, I'm doing a wedding of a 7th generation member whose family, the Bloom families that Bloom Elementary is named after. Take a look at that chart. That's us. That's America. Ignore everything you've seen in the news, well, what's happening in New Albany, and what's happening in France, and what happened in Pittsburgh, what happened in Charlottesville. That's America. Let me walk over here. In 2014, Pew Research, which is America's great research and demographic institution, which began to look at America's religious life, since that's not covered in census material, did a study of what they said America's feelings towards various religious groups. On an index of warmness, how warmly do you feel? Warmness index would take a whole lecture, I'm not going to go into that, but let's just say that warm is better, cold is not. Got that? So, according to their study, the most respected, warmly felt religion in America is Judaism. Let me just tell you that's a long walk. Okay, for Americans across the board to say that Jews, 63% of Americans, would be the religion they had the greatest respect for. That's not the world of the 1850s or the 1950s, to be perfectly honest, but it's the world we've created together, where minority religions can be respected. You'll notice that immediately below Jews are Catholics. These are the people that were being rioted against by the Americans in 1850. The respect for diversity in religion in America has become a hallmark of this nation. That's who we really are. And while Muslims in America ranked particularly low on this score in 2014, you'll notice how pretty much every category of religious belief in the course of their 3 years since that first landmark study have moved up. We as a country are beginning to respect more the members of our diversity community. You don't see that in the paper that often. You don't see that on television that often. But that's who we really are. The question is, are we willing to stand for what we really are in the face of people who disagree with that worldview? Starting in 2014, in what was viewed as a blip in the demographic numbers, the organization called the Anti-Defamation League, which charts, it's a group that was started back in the 1940s, that charts anti-Semitic activity in the United States, which had all but closed its doors, to be perfectly honest, and begun charting anti-Semitic activity outside the United States around the world because there wasn't enough here to keep track of, because that problem had gone away, began to notice an uptick in anti-Semitic activity in the United States, which means assaults against Jews, vandalism of Jewish institutions and property, and threats to Jewish institutions. You'll notice that the numbers are beginning to climb from 2013 in the blue to the significant increases they saw in 2014. Nobody really understood that. 1 year, then the next year came. Comparing 2015 to 2016, there was a 34% increase in anti-Semitic acts against Jews here in the United States. These donut charts give you an idea of the way ADL tracks these things. In the small, bright yellow pieces, you see assaults. The relatively small number, nationally 36, have moved to 56. That's a big percentage jump, but it's still a very small number. But look at the numbers in terms of harassment and vandalism. And the overall numbers that have run from 940 some total attacks against Jews of one kind or another to 1,266 in a 1 year period. That's a 34% increase. That number includes a doubling of the amount of anti-Semitic bullying and vandalism at non-denominational, meaning public or non-denominational secular private schools. K through 12 grade schools doubled the rate of either vandalism of lockers or property of the school, or bullying or things like that among the students. From 2016 to 2017, we've seen a 57% rise on that 34% rise from the year before. This isn't a blip. It's an issue we begin to have to address in American life because it's a consistent pattern that runs against decades of declining acts of anti-Semitism almost to a level that doesn't even recognize statistical significance. In this period, from 2016 to 2017, the total number of incidents against Jews in the United States went up 57%. And scary as that number is, acts of vandalism went up 86% in America in a 1 year period. The ADL, just to be clear that you understand what we're talking about, harassment by the terms that they're using, which is the material you see in the dark or black parts of the circle, had to be specifically perceived to be harassment against a person because of their religious identity. And ADL has been very careful to be very clear on these numbers. You know, people get harassed, they happen to be Jewish. Okay, that doesn't necessarily qualify for these numbers. And they investigate every example before adding it to their statistics. Vandalism has to be property damage, not just against a religious institution that's identifiably Jewish, but that identifies the vandalism as specifically a hate crime, meaning swastikas or some other anti-Jewish, spray painting or attack, not just someone broke the windows or broke into the building. And an assault against someone who's Jewish needs to be accompanied by the sort of things that you need for hate crime legislation. A clear and intentional assault against that person because of their status as a religious minority. Now these numbers are consistent, they're apples to apples comparisons, and they're very stringent in terms of not overblowing the situation. That's ADL's general approach. And by those same one pattern to the next, we've gone up 34%, then 57%, and in categories of vandalism, 86% in the course of a year. The one positive thing on this list is that acts of actual assault have declined over this time and have remained at a, relatively speaking, on a national basis, low level. Anti-Semitic attacks against Jews have happened in every state of the Union last year. That's the first time that's been true since like the 1950s. Usually these things concentrate, which they're still concentrated in, where there are large populations of Jews, like in New York or in California or in Florida or places like New Jersey. But half of these incidents may have occurred in those six predominant, higher population Jewish areas. The other half happened in every state, and if you're looking carefully, there were 5 in Kentucky during that year. This is a comparison over the past 3 years. Without digging into the chart too deeply, you can see that there's a regular variation. During the middle of the year, you see less of this because schools are out, and a lot of this is associated with college campuses and primary and high schools. But the peaks of them going from the first year, which is the darker one at the bottom, the next year and the next year demonstrate that this is really moving at a radical pace. There was a string of bomb threats you may have seen in the newspapers, that were striking Jewish institutions, largely synagogues and Jewish community centers, mostly around the country, which turned out to be one individual outside this country who has been prosecuted. But even when you take out that number, which spiked things that year, there was still an 18% increase here in the United States of unrelated issues. Most importantly, this is a graph from the past decade of anti-Semitic acts in the United States, incidents against Jews in these 3 categories. And you can see this is the tail end of a constantly declining number that goes back to the 1950s. Things have always been getting better. Greater education, greater respect for diversity, greater civil rights, a greater involvement of the Jewish community in the broader sectors of American life have brought a constant growing acceptance of Jews throughout the community until 2014. Then things have just begun to move upwards, and you can see the difference between 2016 and 2017. These statistics are due out in another month for 2018. People are sitting on kind of bated breath to see what that represents. But to give you context, the ADL's index for France, which you've been seeing in the paper, I imagine, went up 74% in terms of anti-Semitic attacks, vandalism, and harassment in just last year. Public space incidents were up 56% in 1 year. Incidences on college campuses have been up 89%. And anti-Semitic incidents in K-12 schools were up 94% in 1 year. This is a problem. It's a challenge to who we are as Americans, more than a challenge for just the Jewish community to begin to address. Now, the K-12 numbers probably have to do with some better reporting. I hope. Because I hope they're reporting this better, and because I hope those numbers aren't possibly as large as a 94% increase. But even within that context, we always reported vandalism in the schools, and vandalism of a anti-Semitic nature is up significantly as well. You can see that in the numbers that went from 85 acts last year to 221 the following year in public schools around America. This isn't an isolated issue. Increased, if there's a list of people that we don't like them, for the Jewish community, we're almost always going to be in the them, okay? And the more there's a divisive aspect of life in American life, whether it's immigrants, whether it's other minority groups of religious, racial, or ethnic, or gender basis, that will always be an issue for the Jewish community. And the attack on the synagogue in Pittsburgh is probably the best example. The Jewish community has been very welcoming and involved in efforts to help resettle immigrants to this country. And the reason that the person who attacked the synagogue in Pittsburgh attacked that place was because we represented, the people who were there are all Americans, born and bred in most cases. We represented a value of respect for diversity that he opposed so much that he wanted to go on a homicidal raid. Hate crimes in the United States as reported by the FBI, which are not reported very systematically, not in the way that the ADL tracks anti-Semitic attacks. But you don't need to be tracking really well or read charts really well to see that one. Hate crimes are up in 2017 to 7,175 incidents, rising to the highest level since September 11th. 5 minutes? I'm moving. Okay. Most hate crimes are based on race. That's the chart on the left. But the second is religious hate crimes. And in 2016 to 2017 numbers, you can see how much that's grown up. Most religious discrimination in the United States is against Jews. The huge pillar on the left there and the rising pillar that was represented in 2014, 2015, 2016. The only other one that's even close is the Islamic community, which faces discrimination of its own. I'll skip through this just to give you a context. In America, on the ADL's global index, 9% of Americans can be identified as virulently anti-Semitic on a list of like 12 or I think it's 16 questions that are asked that I doubt any of you would respond as prejudiced as necessary to get one. You need to get 6 of those to be able to qualify with somebody who is virulently anti-Semitic. That only represents about a 9% in the United States. It went up to 10% last year. In England, it's about 12%. Around the world, it ranges from 20 to 30 to 50%, depending on what region of the world we're talking about. Jews outside of the United States face social hostilities in more countries than any other religion in the world. And on this map of Eastern Europe, the places that are in darker colors indicate places where Jews, where the majority of people in the country don't think Jews should even be allowed to be citizens. Take a look at the map again. Okay, that's pretty much on one level or another all of Eastern Europe. And in response to that, like in the response to Bloody Monday, Jews are fleeing from those places. Jewish population in Europe in the 1930s, before the Holocaust, was about 9.5 million. There were about 3.5 million after the war, minus the 6 million who died during the Holocaust. That number dropped to 3.2 million by the 60s, to 2 million by the 90s, to 14 million by 2010, which is the last time we have solid numbers until 2020. People are leaving France. France is, by the way, the largest Jewish center of population outside the United States and Israel. And the fleeing of Jews from France because of the anti-Semitism that it's facing is a significant issue, both in terms of where those people are going to be refugees to, and France's own identity, as evidenced by yesterday's mass marches, tens of thousands of people in the streets demonstrating that there need to be greater protections of Jews, and the government needs to establish consistent and persistent efforts to combat anti-Semitism in France. And I'm going to have to flip through really quickly to say, where is this coming from? Much as I really hate to pick a bad guy, because that releases us all of the responsibility of being the good guys in this situation to make a difference. People are trying to divide us, okay? And it's working. And the more we're aware of that, the more we can combat it. If you please don't get your news from Facebook, but if you did, the world we live in is a very divisive place. And there are people whose job it is to see to it that you read that in alternate news services. The company that was doing all the meddling before the election that everybody's talking about, interestingly, most of the ads they were putting out were not about either political candidate. They were about race and other issues that divide us. There were as high as 360 new ads bought every month in the period running between June 2015, which is before the election really begins to start, and running up through the election and through August of 2017. Most of these things were about race. After that, it was about crime or policing, immigration, and guns. The people in Russia who are working to send these ads all over our world, they know just what divides us. And they know that dividing us is the best thing to weaken us. On the other hand, it just turns out that the more you know someone, the less likely you are to have prejudiced values against them. And that the less you know someone, the more likely other things will happen. This is a quick clip from the ADL about some work that they're doing, and then we'll open it up for discussion, questions. I have a list of questions to ask you, but I hope you look at this and then ask me. That's Louisville's JCC. So besides the ad for a great organization called the Anti-Defamation League, it's a demonstration of the efforts that have always been true. That education, that organizations like this, that gather people from a variety of different backgrounds, cultures, religions, and traditions, can become the sort of building blocks of the country, the community, and the city of Louisville that we want to be. And inviting me here, I want to say again, thank you, to be able to talk about a tough topic. I would be very pleased to answer any questions you've got on that subject. And if you don't ask questions, I will, so save yourself from that.
Hi, Rabbi. We appreciate your coming. My name is Larry Sloan. And you indirectly touched on technology when you were talking about these ads that try to divide us. Is the ADL trying to catch up with the technology that seems to be the means that the hate organizations are using to divide us?
Thank you. The ADL is working on trying to address cyberbullying and a variety of other online issues, but they're very loath, I don't know if they're right or wrong about this, to include them in their current statistics. It's a new phenomena, and they're trying to track it, sort of beginning like last year they began to really take careful stock of it. I think, frankly, as an American society, we're behind the curve on this. We've become, since the last election, aware, but I think most people think, so they put up an ad online, what's the big deal? How many people really click those things? But the ability to be able to move public opinion, to inflame already existent ideas, and the targeted nature of it is something that I think we really need to become much more adept at responding to. It's always true that the problem leads before the solutions do. And government intervention or interventions by nonprofits like ADL is always one step behind, but they've started.
Rabbi, thank you. I'm Penny Peebler, and I wanted to ask you if you thought that changes to school curriculum and in the ways we learn civic classes in government and high school have contributed to this, or do you think there are other, I guess, school curriculum related classes that have contributed to this big change?
I think it's, school curriculum is, let me put it this way. School curriculum is the basis of being able to help address this problem. That's definitely true. When we don't avail ourselves of that, it's a real challenge. We don't have a national curriculum in the United States, which means that we can't mandate that everybody study anything. Individual states address this on a state-by-state basis, and the way they address it, affects the way textbooks are written, which affects the way everybody studies. It's very important material. Here in Kentucky, it took a really long time to get Holocaust education to be even part of the curriculum standards. I banged my head against that for a decade, and I finally gave up and worked with JCPS to see to it that at least everybody in Louisville studies Holocaust education in 9th grade through a curriculum called Facing History in Ourselves. I want to do a shout out to St. Francis of Assisi, okay, and their 6th through 8th grade class, who shamed our lawmakers in Frankfurt for a period of like 5 or 6 years, showing up on their doorsteps, talking to them about the Holocaust. Fred Whitaker, their teacher, was an unbelievable hero in that regard, and everyone in Kentucky studies Holocaust education. But like, for instance, the situation that just happened over the river, they don't even have hate crime legislation in Indiana. They're one of 5 states that doesn't, which means there's effectively no way to even prosecute that. So societal changes that we can really move forward on in terms of seeing to it that our children are educated in the way in almost all the private schools they are, to respect these kinds of issues of diversity and to have a respect for people of other faiths, has to happen in public schools, and it has to happen in a very concerted and consistent way, I guess. Thanks, Ben.
Andrew Kuhn, ABS, a couple things from kids go to St. Francis. It's fantastic when they did that.
I sound like the St. Francis too.
Awesome. My question kind of goes along with technology. I was curious when you brought up the threats and the accounts of threats. Does that take into account social media? From your answer a second ago, it sounds like it doesn't, but they're trying to work on how to track those threats via Facebook, Twitter, and those accounts. So if you would touch on that a little bit.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the distinction between the questions. I missed a couple of words there.
So just how are the threats tracked via social media? I'm assuming those do not currently go into the threat count. That's,
it takes an actual act and a specific act against you. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
We don't, frankly, do that very well. We rely on the FBI, Homeland Security organizations. The threats to the bomb threats that came through to JCCs all across the country eventually was a joint mission between the Israeli Shin Bet, which is their FBI, and our FBI, working in concert to be able to find someone halfway across the globe who was, it was like an episode of CSI, bouncing his internet signal across, continents, in order to be able to keep from being detected. So it's a real challenge. And you can imagine working in an institution, when you get a bomb threat, how serious is this bomb threat? And there's kids in the building. It doesn't really matter, does it? You think about the security and safety of the people who were there. So that year was an unbelievably disrupting and unsettling year, and it creates an environment both of fear and copycat kind of behavior, where all the other things around become coming out of the woodwork too. If you don't have another questions, I do. Oh, thank you.
I got one more.
Okay.
Cynthia in Apex with Leadership Louisville, huge fan of the whole message about getting to know our neighbors, helps us erase all of the hate and the divides. I'm curious, who else in this community, if people wanted to lean in, we talked a lot about education and curriculum, but outside of that, who else is doing good work in this area? people, organizations, initiatives, where else can our fellow Rotarians go to do more?
Thank you for that opportunity for a public service announcement on behalf of interfaith efforts in the community. You can pick up your check on the way out the door. Thank you. There are a lot of organizations whose immediate mission, doesn't necessarily fall into this category, but do this work consistently. Three of my favorites are Interfaith Path to Peace, which is a grassroots organization which does some phenomenal work in terms of both showing up whenever there's acts of violence against anyone on the basis of faith or ethnic diversity, and being peacemakers in our community on a regular basis. Hala Karimi is the director, and they're doing something literally round the clock. You can be involved. Center for Interfaith Relations and their Festival of Faith really marks Louisville as a compassionate community and builds it every year. The events that are held are eye-opening for their Festival of Faith each year. And they bring together a wide diversity of the religious community and the non-religious community on environmental, social, and communal issues. And we're right next door or a block away from the Muhammad Ali Center. We do phenomenal work in diversity, both racial and religiously as well. I mentioned Babar at the beginning, but the Islamic community at River Road Mosque and the compassion community that's represented there has done phenomenal work in terms of whether it's the Hindu temple or a Jewish institution or an Islamic institution or anything is being sort of the foundation work of good works in the community.
Rabbi, thank you for your presentation. Fred Cowan here. Trying to put aside the current political climate, if you will, I wonder if you can address what appears to be the growth of these incidents, both against Jews and against Muslims, which seems to be increasing as well. And what do the best thinkers, or you, or anyone think is the cause of this, and the underlying causes? Is it unemployment? Is it sense of alienation? Is it sense of helplessness? Whatever. And what's the long-term solutions?
That'd be another lecture, but thank you for going to the very heart of the issue. I appreciate that. There used to be an expectation that when the economy goes down, issues of anti-Semitism and anti-immigrant and anti-anybody, because everybody starts to look more specifically at their own. So when the economy goes down, such things go up. The economy goes up, such things go down. The economy went down, things didn't actually increase. That was several years ago. The economy went up, and these increases are happening now. A few thoughts on that subject. While the economy has returned, the disparity between rich and poor in this country has never been greater. And that disparity is a national ill. It's a prophetic ill. Read Amos. Okay, I mean, it's a moral quandary that we need to address until we address the issues of economic justice. There'll be people who are haves and people who are have-nots, and the have-nots will be looking for easy fingers to point at whether it's racial distinctions, or religious distinctions, or just any scapegoat group, because it's just simpler to solve a problem by blaming somebody for it, which is why I'm loath to say the Russians created this problem on the internet. It's a problem, but we have this problem to deal with on our own. In terms of best minds thinking, we are still responding to these things as if they're one event issues at a time. Pittsburgh, there was this horrible attack on a synagogue there. Here in our community, communities all over America, people stood up, civic, meetings, interfaith things. We all get together, we all hug each other, we all hold hands, and then we all go home. We did it after the Kroger shooting. We do it after each of these, bad examples, but then we all go home. We got to stop going home. We have to start building the institutions like the National Conference of Christians and Jews, the American Jewish Committee, various other institutions that used to be the foundation of building, the bridges and keeping them moving, rather than assuming that we're all just the good people that we are. We are the good people that we are. We just need to stand up more regularly and more persistently. What you see going on in France is a good case study model. They really recognize that literally an entire community is ready to leave because they're under such assault. And this community has been in France since forever. Okay, as long as there's been democracy in France, there's been a Jewish community in before. There's national rallies, a persistent intention. National hate crime legislation is being strengthened in a way that we don't have national hate crime legislation. We don't even have hate crime legislation in every state, which means that when something like what's going on in New Albany, people are spray painting something or stickering something, you get the same penalty for spray painting your mom's name on somebody's car as you do a swastika or some hate speech on a church. There's a real problem there, and if we don't address it nationally, consistently, and persistently, then we're never really going to be able to address it because they're being persistent. I don't really believe that there are more separate groups. It's still this fringe of single digits in America, but they've been given license by the politics of our time, and they're not being responded with the rest of America saying, I don't know who you people are, but have you read the Declaration of Independence? Have you read the Constitution? Have you read the Bill of Rights? This is what America stands for.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Let's give him another round of applause. Judd Hendricks is going to be in the back talking about Lean In Louisville, and Andrew Coombe is going to be talking about Rotary. Thank you all. Have a great week.